to force us, that's what they want, to undermine our negotiation, to force us, that's what they want, to force us to beg, for yet another pointless delay. If that happens, all the progress that we have been making will have been for nothing. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, a deal was published, a bill that the Leader of the Opposition has spent all summer working on. And this is not a bill in any normal sense of the word. It is without precedent in our history. It is a bill that, if passed, would force me to go to Brussels and beg an extension. It would force me to accept the terms offered. It would destroy any chance of negotiation for a new deal. It would destroy it. And indeed, it would enable our friends in Brussels to dictate the terms of the negotiation. That's what it does. There is only one way, Mr. Speaker, to describe this deal. It is Jeremy Corbyn's surrender bill. That's what it is. It means running up the white flag. The bill's shameful. It means running up the white flag. And I want to make clear to everybody in this House, there are no circumstances in which I will ever accept anything like it. I will never surrender the control of our negotiations in the way the Leader of the Opposition is demanding. Mr. Speaker,
Order. People mustn't keep ranting from a sedentary position. However long it takes, the statement will be heard and the response to it will be heard. That is the reality, and nothing can gainsay it. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we promised the people we would get Brexit done. We promised to respect the result of the referendum, and we must do so now. Enough is enough. The country wants this done, and they want the referendum respected. We are negotiating a deal. And though I am confident of getting a deal, we will leave by October the 31st in all circumstances. There will be no further pointless delay. This House has never before voted to force the Prime Minister to surrender such a crucial decision to the discretion of our friends and neighbours overseas. Because what this bill would mean is that unless we agree to the terms of our friends and partners, they would be able to keep us in the EU for as long as they want and on their terms. And I urge, therefore, this House to reject this bill tonight so that we can get the right deal for our country, deliver Brexit and take the whole country forward. And I commend this statement, Mr. Speaker, to the House. Thank you.
Order. For the avoidance of doubt, there is no vote on a bill tonight. There is a vote on a motion. And if that motion is successful, there would be a bill tomorrow. Order. I say this simply because the intelligibility of our proceedings to those observing them is important, and I'm sure everybody on all sides of the House would recognise that fundamental truth. The Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of his statement. And I join with him in recognising the great human suffering of World War II, the great human bravery that took place during that war, in that awful conflict which began 80 years ago, but was essential in defeating the disgusting ideology of the Nazis and fascism at that time. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister met EU leaders over the summer and the EU Council President Tusk at the G7. After these meetings, the Prime Minister struck an optimistic note, saying the chances of a deal were, in his words, improving. His optimism was not shared by those who have been at the same meetings. The Prime Minister may claim progress is being made, but EU leaders report that the government has so far failed to present any new proposals. Can the Prime Minister clear this up? Can he tell us if the UK has put forward any new proposal in relation to the backstop? If so, will he publish them so that these proposals can be scrutinised by Parliament and by the public? It's becoming increasingly clear that this reckless government only has one plan: to crash out of the EU without a deal. The reality is exposed today in the in-house journal of the Conservative Party, otherwise known as the Daily Telegraph, which reports the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff calling negotiations a sham. Reports that the strategy is to, quote, run down the clock, and that the proposal to alter the backstop is a complete fantasy. And those are the words of the Attorney General. No deal, Mr. Speaker, will mean food shortages, reduced medical supplies, and chaos at our ports. Not me saying that. The government's own leaked analysis says, and it warns of chaos all across the board. Today, we had expected a publication of the government's no-deal preparations. This government is hiding from scrutiny, hiding from the people, and trying to hide us from their true intentions. This isn't just a government in chaos, but a government of cowardice. Thankfully, some in Whitehall are putting these vital documents into the public domain. But we shouldn't have to rely on sporadic leaks. So will the Prime Minister set out today when these documents will be published so that the people and Parliament can scrutinise and debate them? Many on the benches opposite would relish a no deal. They see it as an opportunity to open up Britain to a one-sided trade deal which puts us at the mercy of Donald Trump and the United States corporations. That will increase the wealth of a few at the expense of the many. When it comes to the crunch, Mr. Speaker, too many on the government benches who once opposed a no-deal outcome are now putting their own careers before the good of the people of this country. Just look at all those Tory leadership candidates who said it would be wrong to suspend Parliament in order to make no deal a reality, or more likely, but sit passively as their principles of just a few short weeks ago are cast aside. I don't know what they were doing over their summer holidays, but something changed. And it gets worse. Not only have they all stood by while the Prime Minister launches his latest attack on democracy, some have repeatedly refused to rule out the possibility that the government could ignore any law passed by Parliament which was attempting to stop a no-deal Brexit. So will the Prime Minister, when he responds in a moment, take the opportunity to assure the country that his government will abide by any legislation passed this week by this Parliament? The attack on our democracy in order to force through a disastrous no-deal Brexit is unprecedented, anti-democratic and unconstitutional. Labour will do all we can to protect our industry, protect our democracy, protect our people against this dangerous and reckless government. I condemn the rhetoric the Prime Minister used when he talked about a surrender bill. I hope he will reflect on his use of language. I really do hope he will reflect on his use of language. We're not surrendering because we're at war with Europe. They are surely our partners. If anything, it is a no-deal exit that would mean surrendering our industry, our jobs, surrendering our standards of protections in a trade deal with Donald Trump and the United States. Mr. Speaker, the UK should be using its position in the G7 to promote policies to tackle the climate emergency. The climate emergency is real, but instead of standing up to President Trump to save his blushes this time, it was in fact agreed there would be no joint communique on this at the G7. This is not leadership, this is fiddling while the Amazon burns. The situation across the Amazon should be a wake-up call to this Prime Minister, who once described global warming as primitive fear without foundation. As we watch fires rage, not only across the Amazon, but Angola and the Democratic Republic of Congo, does he stand by those sentiments? While funds to protect and restore the Amazon rainforests are welcomed, the Prime Minister knows this is merely a drop in the ocean. So will more money be pledged for the Amazon, and are additional funds being made available to tackle fires in sub-Saharan Africa? And will he be introducing measures to stop UK companies from aiding, abetting and profiting from the destruction of the Amazon rainforest and indeed the rainforests in West Africa? The UK Parliament on May the 1st became the first state parliament anywhere in the world to declare a climate emergency, and I was proud to move that motion. We must continue to show global leadership on this issue. On Iran, Mr. Speaker, it's notable that the Prime Minister fails to condemn President Trump's decision to unilaterally tear up the internationally agreed Iran nuclear deal, creating this crisis which now risks a slide into even deeper conflict. Does the Prime Minister plan to work with European partners to restore the Iran nuclear deal and de-escalate tensions in the Gulf? We are clear that in government Labour would work tirelessly through the UN for a negotiated reinstatement of the nuclear deal and to defuse the threat of war in the Gulf. Effective diplomacy, not threats and bluster, must prevail. And will the Prime Minister call on the Iranian authorities to end the unjust detention of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe? And what actions has he taken so far to ensure her release from the terrible situation that she has been plunged into? Mr. Speaker, we're all concerned about the situation in Hong Kong. No government anywhere should get to shut down rights and freedoms or to pick and choose which laws it adheres to. Will he urge the Chinese government to stick to the Joint Declaration of 1984 and stand up for the rights of citizens in Hong Kong? Mr. Speaker, later today, this House has a last chance to stop this government from riding roughshod over constitutional and democratic rights in this country, so that a cabal in Downing Street can crash us out without a deal, without any democratic mandate and against the majority of public opinion. He isn't winning friends in Europe, he's losing friends at home. His is a government with no mandate, no morals, and as of today, no majority.
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman knows full well that this country has engaged actively with our European friends and partners, to make sense of the Iran nuclear deal and to ensure that that deal continues. And he will know that the FCO, my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, continues to work actively to secure the release not just of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, but all the very sad consular cases that we are currently dealing with in Iran. I pay tribute to him and to the work of all his officials. Mr. Speaker, I'm glad for what he said about the importance of preserving democracy in Hong Kong, and he will observe the strength of the G7 statement on that matter. But quite frankly, when it comes to the bill that he is assisting in bringing forward tomorrow with the procedure that is coming forward tonight, Mr. Speaker, let us be in no doubt. This is a Bennite, a former Bennite opposite. I mean, he still is a Bennite, I believe. He is a man who voted against every single piece of EU legislation. He voted against Maastricht. He voted against Lisbon time and time again. He has said that we must uphold the result of the EU referendum. Time and time again he has said that he's on the side of democracy and vindicating the will of the people. And what do we see now, Mr. Speaker? He has been converted. He has been converted with his hordes of momentum activists trying to take over the streets, converted into the agent of those who would subvert democracy and overturn the will of the people. He has become, that is what he wants wants to do, he wants to entrust the decision about how long this country remains in the European Union to our friends and partners in Brussels and not to this House. That is not democracy, Mr. Speaker. I'm afraid that the right honourable gentleman opposite, inadvertently or not, has become the agent of further delay, further confusion, further uncertainty for business in this country and abroad. That is what he is prescribing. That is what he stands for. That is the result of his policy, and I urge everybody on all sides of the House not to support his approach. Let us go forward and not back with the honourable member opposite.
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's extraordinary knockabout performance today merely confirms, it seems to me, his obvious strategy, which is to set conditions which make no deal inevitable, to make sure that as much blame as possible is attached to the EU and to this House for that consequence, and then as quickly as he can fight a flag-waving general election before the consequences of no deal become too obvious to the public. Perhaps my right honourable friend would let me know whether that clear explanation of his policy is one he entirely accepts. And does he also accept that if he gets his way and gets no deal, we then have to begin years of negotiations with the Europeans and the rest of the world about getting new trade, security, other arrangements in force? And does he seriously think that this approach will obtain from any other country in the world a free trade arrangement which is half as good as the common market which Conservative governments have helped put together over the years?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as he knows, I'm a keen fan and a lifelong fan.
I want to hear what the order. Sit down. Sit down. Yeah, I'm very grateful. I want to hear what the Prime Minister has to say in response to the question, and that answer, that response, must be heard. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, as the Father of the House knows, I'm a long-standing admirer of the right honourable member for Rushcliffe, and indeed I was the only member of the 2001 intake to vote for my right honourable friend as a leader of the Conservative Party. I was. A fact that I don't think he much thanked me for it at the time or since. But I've long been a fan of his, and indeed in many ways we are ad item in our views of politics. And I agree with him, Mr. Speaker. I don't want an election. I don't want an election. We don't want an election. I don't think he wants an election, Mr. Speaker, by the way, as far as I can make it out. We don't want an election. We want to get the deal done. And the best way, Mr. Speaker, to get a deal is to support the government in the lobbies tonight.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement? My goodness, this is the second time the Prime Minister's been at the dispatch box. This must be the shortest-lived honeymoon in parliamentary history. You simply have to look around the benches. He may say he doesn't want an election. His colleagues certainly don't want one, but I'll let him into a secret. We do. Because we want the people of Scotland to be able to have their say on this shambolic government. The Leader of the House talks about the strategy of the Prime Minister, and I have to say to him respectfully, when we hear use of the word collaborators, when we hear the use of the word surrender, the Prime Minister really should have some dignity and show some respect to the office that he temporarily holds. And of course, I think one of the most remarkable things that took place during the statement was to see the member for Bracknell cross the floor. Prime Minister, you've lost your majority. Mr. Speaker, over the weekend, we saw commemorations across the world to mark the 80th anniversary of the Second World War, when brave citizens came together and stood together against tyranny. My thoughts and those of my party are with those who suffered, the veterans and their families. We should also recognise that the European Union is the legacy of two world wars that had ripped Europe apart. The European Union has been an important vehicle for peace and stability in Europe. Turning to the G7 summit, Mr. Speaker, I wish to express my shared concern at the unrest in Hong Kong. I also associate myself with the actions on climate change, on protecting the Amazon rainforest. But, Mr. Speaker, I do take issue with President Trump's comments in relation to Russia. It is not acceptable to condone Russia's military and cyber aggression around the world. Furthermore, while the summit declared its support for progress in the Ukraine, the President of the United States failed to challenge Russia's violation of international law in Ukraine, another utterly disgraceful lack of leadership from the President of the United States. Mr. Speaker, following the summit, the Prime Minister displayed his own lack of leadership by moving to prorogue Parliament and strip power away from elected representatives, closing down Parliament by sending 3 Privy Councillors to instruct the Queen to sanction the closure of Parliament. 3 Privy Councillors acting on the instructions of the Prime Minister to shut down Parliament. Where is the democracy in that? And while we can dance around and profess to speak for the people, Mr. Speaker, we all know the truth. He is in fact doing the opposite. By proroguing Parliament, the Prime Minister is robbing the people of power, robbing them over a say over their future. In true Trumpian style, the Prime Minister is acting more like a tin-pot dictator than a Democrat. He talks of the will of the people, but what about the will of the people of Scotland? Prime Minister, the Scottish people did not vote for Brexit. The people of Scotland did not vote for a no-deal Brexit. They did not vote for the Tory party, and they certainly did not vote for this Prime Minister. The people of Scotland voted to remain in the European Union. The Scottish people voted overwhelmingly against the Tory party and this government. The people of Scotland made their choice, and they chose that the SNP should be their voice. So I ask the Prime Minister, are you a Democrat or not? Do you respect the will of the Scottish people or not? And will you, Prime Minister, if you believe yourself not to be the latter, then will you give the people back their say, allow Parliament to have its say, respect the will of Parliament in stopping a no-deal Brexit that would be devastating for jobs and communities?
Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Gentleman makes a serious point about the US's attitude towards Russia. May I just gently remind him that when it came to the Skripal poisonings in Salisbury, the United States actually expelled 60 diplomats in support of the UK, in solidarity with the UK, and to show their revulsion at Russian behaviour. As for whether or not it's right to have a Queen's speech, Mr. Speaker, the opposition have been calling for a Queen's speech just about every week, and finally they get one and they protest. And on the EU, it remains, of course, the policy of the Scottish Nationalist Party. Once we have come out of the European Union on October the 31st, it is their policy, their avowed policy, they're inevitably committed to this by logic, to go back into the EU. That's what they say they want to do if they were to achieve independence, to submit to the whole panoply of EU law, to scrap the pound in favour of some unknown currency hitherto unbaptised, the salmon or the sturgeon or whatever it happens to be, and above all, to hand back control of Scotland's fisheries to the EU, just as they've been reclaimed by this country. What an extraordinary policy! What an extraordinary policy, Mr. Speaker.
Sir John Redwood, will the Prime Minister confirm that from the 1st of November it will be the UK government and authorities in control of our ports like Dover? And will he confirm that it will be the government's policy to ensure the smooth transit of food, pharmaceuticals and other goods into our country as today, and that will be the policy so there will not be shortages?
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, and I can confirm that is exactly what the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancashire and others have been preparing for months, and that those measures are now well in train.
Jay Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has lost his majority, with the Honourable Member for Bracknell joining the Liberal Democrats. Doctors like him tell me they want to stop Brexit because it will plunge our NHS into deep crisis, hemorrhaging vital staff and threatening access to life-saving medicines. When will the Prime Minister stop playing with people's lives and stop Brexit?
I'm glad that the Right Honourable Lady has given me occasion to remind the House that there are in fact 700 more doctors in the NHS since the vote to leave the EU. And actually, just in the last 6 weeks, Mr. Speaker, we've been able to announce another 1.8 billion going to 20 new hospital upgrades around the country, in addition to the 34 billion extra that the Conservative government is putting into the NHS, Mr. Speaker. So I'm grateful to her for allowing me to point that out.
Mr. Philip Hammond.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend has assured me that he's very keen to get a deal with the European Union. But last Friday, Chancellor Merkel of Germany observed somewhat acerbically that 9 days into the 30 days that the Prime Minister had requested during his visit to Berlin, she hadn't yet seen any proposals from the United Kingdom. Could the Prime Minister now make a commitment to publish this afternoon the UK's proposals so that those of us who are considering what to do later today can have had the benefit of seeing them? And will he further commit to transmitting those proposals without delay to the European Union?
Actually, as I told my right honourable friend this morning, the Chancellor Merkel was making an elementary point, which is that we could easily do a deal within 30 days, and we certainly shall. And what she also said is that there is no point in what my friends across the EU have said, is that there is no point in having a negotiation beginning formal talks, as long as there is a risk that Parliament will make that negotiation impossible by taking away the ability of this country to negotiate. So every time we set out ideas, the first thing they ask, Mr. Speaker, is what will Parliament do? So I urge my friends tonight, I urge colleagues tonight to give us the leeway to get the deal that we need. It is very, very clear. The deal that can be done, the outlines of it are very clear. If members had been listening in my statement earlier, they would have heard the rough shape of what that deal can be, both in getting the alternative arrangements and in solving the problems of the Irish backstop. I'm afraid that by their actions, they're making the chances, I must regretfully say this to the House, they're making the chances of that deal less likely. We are working flat out to secure it, but the measures, if passed tonight, would make our prospects of success much less likely.
Hilary Benn!
Mr. Speaker, it's not just Chancellor Merkel who has confirmed that no substantive proposals have been put forward. Last weekend, the Irish Deputy Prime Minister said, and I quote, "Nothing credible has come from the British government," end of quote, on alternatives to the backstop. It's also reported that the Attorney-General told the Prime Minister at the beginning of August that if he insisted on the removal of the backstop, it would inevitably result in no deal. Is that true? If it's true, can the Prime Minister try and persuade the House why it is credible to argue that progress is being made in the negotiations? Because there's a growing number of members who have come to the conclusion that what he really wants is a no-deal Brexit. And that is why many of us will try over the next 2 days to prevent that from happening in the national interest.
Mr. Speaker, the sad truth is there are many members in this House, and I'm afraid including the right honourable gentleman opposite, who simply want to block Brexit. And that's the truth. And they're using, that is the reality, and they are using the discussion of a so-called no-deal Brexit to conceal their real intentions. And by their measures tonight and tomorrow, they would be fatally undermining this government's ability to negotiate a deal. That is the reality. We can get a deal. We can remove the backstop, and he knows very well what this country needs to do because it's agreed on all sides of the House. The problem with the withdrawal agreement is not just a political declaration, it is the backstop. That makes agreement impossible on both sides of the House. But as long as this House is proposing motions such as the ones tonight and tomorrow, I'm afraid we have no chance of getting progress from our EU friends.
Mrs Anne Main.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. What discussion did my right honourable friend have about the Green Climate Change Fund and what progress has been made, and can he give us an update?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and we are indeed, as I said at the G7. If my memory serves me correctly, we're making a contribution of another £1.4 billion to the Green Climate Fund, and it is a high priority of this government.
Mr Nigel Dodds.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I welcome what the Prime Minister has said about the backstop, because he knows, as well as the entire House knows, that is one of the fundamental reasons why the withdrawal agreement could not get through this House. Not only is it anti-democratic in the sense that laws would be made for the economy of Northern Ireland and nobody in Belfast or London would have any say at all in the making of them or even ask questions about them, but it's also contrary to the principles that people say they believe in the Belfast Agreement and the St Andrews Agreement, which requires the consent of both communities, and no unionist party in Northern Ireland, any member of it, supports the backstop. Can I also welcome his commitment to a deal, because we are committed to getting a deal, a good deal for Northern Ireland and the United Kingdom. And when he meets the Irish Prime Minister on Monday, which I welcome, can he convey to the Prime Minister, as we have tried to convey to him, that it would be entirely sensible and reasonable for him to sit down with us and other representatives of unionists in Northern Ireland for direct discussions, which would be very helpful in the current atmosphere, but which the Irish government has consistently, amazingly, refused to do. At the same time, preaching to others about the need for conciliation and movement and progress. So I appeal to the Prime Minister on the behalf of everyone in Northern Ireland, to try to get some momentum into discussions between the Irish Republic and unionists in Northern Ireland on this vital issue.
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for his support, and he perfectly understands the issues, and he knows that he and I are at one in seeking to get rid of the backstop. And I believe that we can get rid of the backstop, and we can. They see they don't want to. They don't want to do it. We can make progress. We can make progress. We can make progress, but not if we take away. But not if we take away the possibility of no deal, which is what the right honourable gentleman is proposing to do, and not if we give the power. If we give the power infinitely to extend UK membership of the EU to Brussels, which is what his bill would do.
Sir Patrick McLaughlin.
Will the Prime Minister reflect on the fact that when the House of Commons debated the European referendum bill, it was passed with a majority of 6-1? When the House debated the European notification of withdrawal, it was passed 4-1 by this House. What does he think a further 3 or 6 month delay would achieve, other than betraying those people and those votes that we've already had?
I passionately agree with what my right honourable friend has just said, and I urge all those thinking tonight of and tomorrow of voting to extend again beyond October the 31st exactly what they are seeking to do in that interval, what the purpose of that extension would be. Believe me, the people in this country want to get on with it and want to come out.
Angela Eagle.
Speaker, I'm sure completely inadvertently the Prime Minister failed to answer a question that my right honourable friend put to him earlier, and that is that if a bill passes which makes it illegal to leave without a deal, will him and his government abide by the rule of law?
I'm grateful. We will, of course, uphold the Constitution and obey the law.
Jonathan Ginocchli.
Given the huge amount of political repression going on in Russia at the moment, does my right honourable friend agree with President Trump that now is the right time to bring Russia back into the G7?
No, and I made that point very clearly at Biarritz.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's good to hear the Prime Minister say that he will uphold the Constitution and the rule of law, because of course it's essential that the United Kingdom upholds the rule of law for effective working with the G7 in future. So will he give this House his word that he and his government will respect legislation passed by this House and decisions made by the two legal jurisdictions in this Union, the jurisdictions in Scotland and the jurisdictions in England?
I refer to the Honourable Lady the answer I gave just a moment ago.
John Whittingdale.
Speaker, will my right honourable friend confirm his determination to keep up the pressure on Russia, which continues to illegally occupy Crimea and whose involvement in the occupied territories in East Ukraine led to further deaths this weekend? Can I therefore strongly welcome his statement of a dispatch box just now that he agrees it is not appropriate for Russia to rejoin the G7, and will he continue to give every support to newly elected President Zelensky and the members of the Ukrainian Parliament?
And I know the great interest that my right honourable friend has taken in Ukraine and in the fortunes of that wonderful country, and I can assure him that President Zelensky rang me before the G7 particularly to insist on his continued concerns about the Russian activities, and I'm sure that those concerns are shared across this House.
Yvette Cooper.
The Prime Minister's answer to the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, he referred only to the rough shape of an alternative deal. Can he tell us whether he has any detailed proposals, and can he confirm that he has not sent any detailed proposals to the EU?
We have been in extensive talks, but as the right honourable lady will appreciate, it doesn't make sense to negotiate in public, but it's been clear from what I have said already that the backstop is unacceptable, and so is the political declaration as currently written, and we have detailed proposals of how to address both issues, and we are making progress. And I say respectfully to friends on all sides of the House that now is the time to allow UK negotiators to get on with their job.
Sir Edward Lee.
In these discussions with the German Chancellor and the French President, was there discussion around the need for compromise? After all, this issue of the backstop is resolvable with compromise on all sides, and there are many people in this House, moderate Brexiteers and Remainers, who want to compromise. And when it comes to a solution, if the EU won't change the deal, and if this House won't pass the present deal, could I ask the Prime Minister to reflect on the Vienna Convention and the conditional unilateral declaration, which would allow us to unilaterally state our determination to exit from the backstop?
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend, and he has pursued this line of thinking for many months now. I must say that actually I think there is a better and more elegant way of doing this. We can excise the offending bits of the treaty. We can make a great deal of progress. We can have a new treaty. It will be a vast improvement, and I think that members opposite should look forward to it and should be encouraging and supportive of the efforts of this government in getting us out of the EU in a way that they voted for time and time and time again.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
The Prime Minister insists the UK will be ready for no deal, while at the same time duplicity using threat to force the European Union to cave in to his non-existent alternative arrangements. Will the Prime Minister admit that a no-deal scenario would be catastrophic? Or will he continue to face both ways, deceive the public and use no deal for his own electoral gain?
I'm afraid I don't agree with the character, Mr. Speaker. I don't agree with what she has said about no deal. As I said on the steps of Downing Street, I think there will be bumps on the road, but this is a very great country and a very great economy, and we will get it done. I'm afraid the most fatal thing to getting a deal is for this country to show that it is so apprehensive about coming out on other terms as to accept anything that the EU prescribes. And that is, I'm afraid, the course down which the right honourable gentleman opposite is beckoning us to go. And I think that would be a disaster.
Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I warmly welcome the announcement that the Prime Minister made at the G7 to give more money to education cannot wait. The leadership that he has consistently shown on the importance of girls' education around the world. And can he commit to continuing to champion this cause and to seek that more of our aid budget be spent on global education?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for everything she has done, both on the development front and in the FCO to champion female education around the world. I do believe that 12 years of quality education is the single most effective policy for solving most of the ills of the world.
Stephen Doughty.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has made a number of wild and unsubstantiated claims about the negotiations. Can I ask him directly, did the UK's chief Brexit negotiator, Frost, in a Tuesday 27th of August EU subcommittee meeting, link the rationale for talks with EU Task Force 50 to, and I quote, domestic political handling reasons? Yes or no?
I don't comment on leaks, Mr. Speaker. And in addition to that, even if I did, I've got no idea, quite frankly. I think it's highly unlikely.
David Gork.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be aware that many of us are concerned that we are currently on course to leaving the European Union without a deal on the 31st of October, that we won't have time to negotiate and legislate for a new deal. Those concerns were not allayed by reports in the Daily Telegraph this morning that suggested that in a strategy meeting on the 29th of July, it was stated that the government was going to run down the clock. Nor are our concerns allayed by the suggestion that the Attorney General on the 1st of August said that removing the backstop altogether would mean that we would not be able to reach a deal. Are those reports accurate?
Mr. Speaker, I don't comment on leaks. Even in pages as hallowed as the ones described. But what I can tell my right honourable friend is he asked me exactly the same question this morning. We are working for a deal, and I believe we will get a deal, and it should be a deal that I think everybody in this House would want to support, and which, above all, their constituents would want to support. We want this business to be over and for us to leave the EU on October the 31st.
Anna Soubry.
Further to the question asked by the right honourable member opposite, could the Prime Minister confirm that Dominic Cummings described the renegotiations as a sham? And could he also tell this House, a simple yes or no will do, Mr. Speaker, whether it's true that he rang the editor of the Daily Telegraph and remonstrated with him about those reports, of which we have all now heard? Yes or no, Prime Minister? Did you ring him up? Yes or no?
Well, I'm grateful for your honourable name, but I don't comment on it. I have to say that I saw the story on the front of the Telegraph this morning. It seemed to be wholly implausible, but I have not seen. I can happily answer her question on that. I have not seen fit to ring any journalist today on any matter, because as you can imagine, I've been working flat out to get out of the EU on October the 31st.
When it comes to alternative arrangements to the backstop,
the commission that I co-chair, we are making real progress. We published yesterday a revised withdrawal agreement and a political declaration. We are hosting a conference in Dundalk next week, bringing together parliamentarians from across these islands. Can I thank the Prime Minister for the meetings that I've had with his team, and can I assure him that our proposals are in very good shape going forward?
I want to thank my right honourable friend for the fantastic work that he has done with many colleagues to prepare for the alternative arrangements that really do hold out the prospect of a solution to the problem of the Northern Irish border. And if the gentleman opposite would care to study the report, I think he might elucidate himself on that matter. There are a number of proposals that have been made, and indeed many others that hold out real hope of progress. But those are not the only areas, Mr. Speaker, in which we are making progress. There are several areas in which we are now discussing how the UK can retire whole and perfect from the UK can retire from the EU whilst retaining the integrity of the market in Ireland. And that is a hard thing to achieve, but it can be done.
Mr. Speaker, can I first of all apologise to the Prime Minister, because I did make one I did explode a little when he said something about loyalty, and I thought about the loyalty that sometimes it was deficient when we had a different Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Lady from Maidenhead. So my apologies on that, but can I welcome the one thing I really welcome out of the G7 statement that he's made, and that is what he says about girls' education. My daughter was a special advisor to the Foreign Secretary, a former Foreign Secretary. Could he tell me today, is it right that a special advisor could be treated like the young woman was in number 10, to be sacked on the spot, to be marched out of number 10 by an armed police officer? Is that the way to treat women in work, or is it not?
I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for the support he gives to our campaign and to the UK cause of 12 years of quality education for every girl in the world. And I thank members of his family for what they have done also to support that campaign. But on staffing matters, I won't comment as he would expect.
John Barron. Mr. Speaker, most of us in this place would prefer a good trade deal to no deal at all. But does the Prime Minister reflect on the fact that of the top 10 of the EU's trading partners, half are traded on WTO no-deal terms? Would the Prime Minister therefore continue to put to the sword this ludicrous suggestion that Britain would be incapable of trading on such terms? We would prosper.
My honourable friend is totally right, because there is a huge opportunity for the UK to recover its standing, which it used to have before 1973, as a great campaign, a great individual actor for global free trade. And that is what we are going to do, not just with a great free trade deal with our EU friends, which of course will be the centrepiece of our negotiations, but also with free trade deals around the world.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. £10 million to protect the rainforest is welcome, but far more effective would be to stand up to President Bolsonaro, who is deliberately accelerating and encouraging these fires to open up more of the Amazon, threatening indigenous communities, accelerating the climate crisis. So would he do the right thing and refuse any future trading arrangements with Brazil unless and until high environment and human rights standards are properly and fully enforced?
Mr. Speaker, I would be reluctant to encourage any measure now that did anything to reduce free trade around the world, and much better to support the reforestation of Brazil in the way that we are, and we have a campaign to plant 1 trillion trees, Mr. Speaker.
Steve Brine.
Thank you very much, sir. My constituents, as the Prime Minister knows, are passionately pro-deal, and I think the Prime Minister is too. In fact, I know he is. He has told me that personally, and he's told the House many times. But can I just bust one of the most dishonest myths of all, that you can respect the referendum result and be in favour of leaving with a deal? And that's where I think all of my constituents are. Now, the Prime Minister said today the chances of deal have increased. He said that things are moving. I wonder what evidence, therefore, of that progress can he put before the House before votes this week, because it really could be critical for people like me in where we go.
Mr. Speaker, I would just make one point, which was that before we began our efforts, it was common ground with the EU 27 that every dot and comma of the withdrawal agreement was immutable and could not be changed. That is now no longer the case. And we are already shifting them, both in Ireland, in Berlin, and also in France. Progress is being made, and now is not the time to slacken that work.
Stuart Michael MacDonald.
Mr. Speaker, Ruth Davidson walked last week. His majority in this place is gone this week, and he might even expel his hero Churchill's grandson from his own party. I don't care what he does to his own party, but I do take exception to the impact of his policy on Scotland. So isn't it the case that Scots would be better to vote for independence to maintain our place within the European Union?
Scots didn't swallow that argument in 2014. No, they rejected it by a thumping majority, and they could see that they were better off together with the rest of the UK, and so it remains.
Richard Drax.
Speaker, does my right honourable friend agree that the last thing we hear about in this place is the democratic will of 17.4 million people who voted to leave the EU? And make no mistake, the motion, if passed tonight, and the bill on Wednesday, is nothing more than revocation of Article 50, because it will bind his hand to the point we will never, ever be able to leave.
My honourable friend is entirely right, and I'm afraid that too many people who want to vote for the motions both tonight and tomorrow really seek to frustrate the will of the people and to overturn the result of that referendum, to cancel the referendum.
Jessica Morden.
Mr. Speaker, did the Prime Minister have the opportunity at the G7 to discuss issues in the steel industry? And I ask this on behalf of the 380 employees of Coat and Orb in Newport, who yesterday received the devastating news that Tata are to close their plant. Tragic for them, and tragic as the only plant in the UK produce electrical steel, which could, with government encouragement, be a part of the supply chain for electric vehicles.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker, and yes, a huge amount of work is going on at the moment in respect of the Tata investments. As you will have seen what was achieved recently with British Steel in Scunthorpe and Skinning Grove, where I thank my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, and indeed the previous Business Secretary, for his work in getting that deal done, and we will indeed ensure that British steel, UK steel, is used in the supply chain for electric vehicles.
Ross Thompson.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is in the Commonwealth. It's a close friend and ally on defence to trade. So can my right honourable friend update the House on the nature of his discussions with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Biarritz?
My discussions with Prime Minister Trudeau were extremely friendly, and we look forward to rolling over the CETA free trade deal with Canada and taking forward our relations to new heights.
Nigeria.
Mr. Speaker, once again we've heard bluff and bluster from the Prime Minister after a summer where he found a veritable forest of magic money trees. Can he tell me where he will find the money, or has he found a pot of gold?
Can I invite her to listen to the Chancellor's spending review statement tomorrow? And if she's seriously opposing this spending on schools and on hospitals and on police, if that's really what the Labour Party is all about now, when that is well within the limits of fiscal prudence, then I think she should say so.
Graham Patterson.
Mr. Speaker, in his various conversations over the past few weeks, can my right honourable friend confirm that he's made it absolutely clear to all our neighbours and partners that we'll be establishing complete sovereign control over our EEZ from the 1st of November, and that we will be negotiating like a perfectly normal independent maritime nation reciprocal arrangements with our neighbours, and on that has he already got negotiations working with our Nordic neighbours now, because arrangements with our Nordic neighbours are normally settled over the coming few weeks with a view to starting on the 1st of January?
I can certainly confirm that we will be out of the common fisheries policy by 2020, Mr. Speaker, and we will take back control of our fisheries, unlike the SNP, in a supine and invertebrate way, who would hand them back to Brussels.
Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to beg, actually, that the Prime Minister actually answer the question that I'm going to ask and not just say no comment as if we're in a magazine interview. So I have filed with others legal cases against the prorogation of Parliament because I don't want to see the domestic abuse bill, which so many people in this House have worked so hard for, to fall. And so I have filed papers, and I signed my witness statements yesterday. I had to go to my mother-in-law's to print them. I don't have a printer, but I think they probably have one at number 10. So is it true that senior civil servants have refused to sign witness statements for ongoing legal proceedings relating to the prorogation? And were the Director of Legislative Affairs and the Cabinet Secretary asked to, and did they agree? I signed mine. Did they?
So, as the Honourable Lady would imagine, the proper processes were gone through to ensure that we were able to announce a Queen's speech, which is something that the opposition benches have been calling for week after week, and the Right Honourable Lady opposite has demanded a Queen's speech, and she has. And we will also make sure that both the domestic violence and animal welfare bills and others receive proper consideration and are rolled over.
Mark Pritchard.
Mr. Speaker, of course, this is a G7 statement, and the Prime Minister is a celebrated internationalist. But can I, if I may, Mr. Speaker, make a local point? And that is the people of Shropshire, overwhelmingly, the 5 constituency, voted for Brexit. Can my right honourable friend take a slight departure from great matters of state and reassure the people of Shropshire, the good people of Shropshire, that Brexit will be delivered?
I can, Mr. Speaker, and the surest way to deliver Brexit with a deal is to vote with the government both tonight and tomorrow.
Thomas Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For automotive manufacturers in my constituency and beyond, the WTO tariffs that would apply in the case of a no-deal Brexit not only wipe out their profits, but often exceed them. Why should anyone take what the Prime Minister says about jobs and investment seriously when he has been so reckless with people's livelihoods?
We are working with all sectors, including automotive supply chains, to protect their interests. But of course, the best way to ensure that we don't have a no-deal Brexit is to support the government and to oppose the measures that the Leader of the Opposition is putting forward.
Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for mentioning Ben Stokes in his speech? I was lucky enough to be there that day, and it did remind me that sometimes even the most difficult of challenges can be achieved. I do believe it will be possible to achieve an agreed negotiation with the EU, though it is difficult. If it is achieved on October the 17th, is there sufficient time for this House to approve all the necessary legislation before the end of that month?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, indeed there is time, and we have gone thoroughly over the proceedings, and I'm delighted by her confidence. She speaks as someone well acquainted with the ways of Brussels and the EU, and she will know that the deals are always done, as it were, on the steps of the court in the final furlong. That is where we will get the deal.
Liz Kendall.
Can the Prime Minister just completely set the record straight on this? If Parliament passes legislation requiring him to request an extension of Article 50 beyond October the 31st, will he abide by the law?
I we have answered this question, I think, twice before, Mr. Speaker. We will abide by the law. But I have to say, I think it is a quite incredible thing to propose, deleterious to the interests of this country and this government, and which will make it impossible for us to get the deal this country needs.
David Tredinnick.
Mr. Speaker, will my right honourable friend explain in greater detail the steps taken at the G7 to protect endangered species?
Thank my honourable friend. I can indeed explain. He will recall that under the Kyoto Protocol, targets were set for the reduction of greenhouse gases. What the world now wants to see is specific targets, quanta, for the protection of endangered species, whether flora or fauna. And it's a tragedy that the number of elephants is down now to about 300,000 in the wild, the number of lions down to perhaps 15,000. We are seeing the tragic reduction of species around the world, and the world needs to work together to prevent that loss of habitat and loss of species. And that is what we agreed to do at G7. And the Right Honourable Lady doesn't care about it. Believe me, the people of this country care passionately. They care passionately about what is happening to animals around the world. She's totally indifferent to it, but I believe me, my constituents certainly are not.
Alison McGovern.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister tells us he's going to Dublin on Monday to see the Taoiseach, where no doubt he will be asked, he's been asked today, about his proposals for the backstop. So can I ask him if he's seen the comment from former members